The morning of August 24th, 1944 began like so many others in the Western Pacific. Humid air clinging to the water, sunlight just beginning to break across the waves. Beneath that light, less than 30 feet under the surface near the Philippine coast, the periscope of the USS Harder sliced upward like a knife through silk. Through that narrow lens, Commander Samuel Dealey studied his enemy. Ahead, a Japanese escort frigate, designation CD-22, cut through the shallows, engines roaring, sonar pinging like a heartbeat. The hunter had become the hunted, and Dealey knew this dance too well. For 2 years he had outthought, outfought, and outlasted destroyers across the Pacific. He had earned a name whispered through the submarine fleet, the destroyer killer. And now, in these shallow waters, he faced one more duel. Within minutes, explosions would shake the sea, and then silence. The USS Harder and her 79 men would vanish forever, their final battle sealing a transformation that had redefined submarine warfare. To understand how Dealey came to that moment, you have to go back, long before the Pacific turned red with war, when the United States Navy believed submarines were scouts, not killers. In the years between the world wars, the submarine service was a cautious fraternity. It was built on silence, patience, and rules that favoured survival over risk. Commanders were taught that their purpose was to observe, report, and, if absolutely necessary, attack only large enemy warships. Merchantmen were off limits. Recklessness was career suicide. Training manuals preached invisibility. Periscopes were to stay hidden, torpedoes fired from long range, and danger avoided at all costs. The Navy had spent the 1930s preparing for the wrong kind of war. When Samuel Dealey graduated from the Naval Academy in 1930, he fit perfectly into that system. Smart, quiet, methodical. Born in Dallas, Texas, he was disciplined but not flashy, the kind of officer who followed procedure. He served dutifully on older submarines like S-34 and S-24, learning the routines of undersea life, the hum of the diesels, the weight of pressure on the hull, the long hours of silence. He was competent but unremarkable. His career might have stayed that way if the world hadn't changed. In 1940, Dealey left submarine duty to serve on a surface ship, the destroyer USS Reuben James. Under Captain H. L. Tex Edwards, the ship patrolled the Atlantic on neutrality missions, shadowing German U-boats long before America officially joined the war. Then, on October 31st, 1941, a torpedo from U-552 struck the Reuben James. The ship exploded and sank with nearly her entire crew. Only 45 men survived. Dealey wasn't aboard. He had transferred off the ship, but his friend Captain Edwards went down with her. That loss marked him. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor 5 weeks later, Dealey's sense of duty sharpened into something harder. He returned to submarines with a single purpose: to fight. By late 1942, he was offered a new command, the USS Harder, one of the Navy's latest Gato-class submarines. At 311 feet long, armed with 10 torpedo tubes, she was among the most advanced boats of her time. But like many early war submarines, she carried a flaw: unreliable diesel engines that broke down under strain. Dealey didn't care. He drove his crew relentlessly through trials, teaching them not just procedure but survival under fire. They learned that the ocean itself could kill as easily as any enemy. When Harder finally left Pearl Harbor in June 1943 on her first war patrol, the crew had faith in their captain. But the Pacific had its own tests waiting. Off the coast of Honshu, Japan, the Harder made her first attack on a convoy. 4 torpedoes raced toward their targets and missed. Within minutes, a Japanese escort charged. Depth charges followed, explosions rolling through the hull like thunder. Dealey ordered a crash dive, pushing the submarine down too far. The bow slammed into the seabed. Mud filled the gauges, pipes rattled, the hull groaned under the weight of the sea. For long minutes the crew waited, breath held as the destroyer circled above. Then Dealey eased the engines in reverse, pulling Harder free. It was a narrow escape, but it changed him. The destroyer hadn't killed them, and that meant destroyers could be beaten. A few nights later, Harder sank her first enemy ship, the seaplane tender Sagara Maru. The victory was small, but it proved that aggression could work. Dealey's cautious instincts began to fade, replaced by a new kind of confidence, the belief that submarines could do more than hide. His next patrol would prove it. In September 1943, Harder returned to Japan's shipping lanes. Over 2 brutal weeks, Dealey attacked convoys with surgical precision. He sank 5 ships totaling 15,000 tons, surviving a 2-day depth charge barrage that nearly drained his batteries. The ordeal forged his reputation. He had stared down fear itself and refused to yield. Word spread through the fleet. Harder's captain didn't just survive, he fought back. When he returned to Pearl Harbor, Admiral Charles Lockwood, the hard-driving commander of US submarines in the Pacific, took notice. He saw in Dealey the kind of officer the new war demanded: aggressive, adaptive, willing to risk everything for results. By the end of 1943, the American submarine force was changing fast. Old habits of caution were dying under fire. Commanders who failed to sink ships were replaced by those who did. The Pacific Ocean had become a proving ground for audacity. In October, Dealey joined a new experiment, a coordinated attack group known as a wolf pack, 3 submarines operating together to hunt Japanese shipping. Harder's 3rd patrol proved that the experiment could work. He sank multiple freighters north of the Marianas, stalking his targets through storms and darkness. When Harder returned to base that winter, she was no longer an untested boat. She was a hunter, and her captain was learning that courage, properly applied, could be as deadly as any weapon. Yet fate had more lessons to teach. In the spring of 1944, Dealey's 4th patrol would introduce him to a situation that would change submarine warfare forever: a destroyer bearing straight down on his position, and a decision no doctrine had ever prepared him for. By the spring of 1944, the ocean had become both graveyard and classroom. American submarines were strangling Japan's supply lines, but destroyers still ruled the shallows. They hunted relentlessly, dropping depth charges until steel cracked and men drowned in silence. Every commander in the Pacific had been taught the same rule: when a destroyer finds you, you dive and run. Samuel Dealey had obeyed that rule once. He would never obey it again. In April 1944, the USS Harder was assigned lifeguard duty near the Caroline Islands, rescuing downed American pilots from waters crawling with Japanese patrols. It was a dangerous, thankless job, requiring a submarine to operate close to enemy shorelines. On April 1st, Dealey risked everything to rescue a wounded aviator pinned on a hostile beach. He pushed harder until her hull scraped coral, sent a small boat through the surf and brought the man home under sniper fire. But it was 12 days later, on April 13th, that the legend of the destroyer killer was born. That morning, an enemy aircraft sighted the submarine and radioed her position to the nearest Japanese warship, the destroyer Ikazuchi. Within minutes, the destroyer was racing toward Harder, cutting through the waves at attack speed, her sonar echoing like drum beats. Inside the submarine, alarms blared. The crew looked to their captain. Doctrine said they should crash dive to maximum depth and pray. Dealey did the opposite. He turned directly toward the destroyer. The men stared in disbelief. It was suicide. But Dealey understood something others didn't. A destroyer charging at a submarine followed a predictable path. Its bow pointed straight down the throat of the attack, locked into a line of approach. If a submarine could fire fast enough, accurately enough, it could send torpedoes straight into that path, before the destroyer could drop a single depth charge. The mathematics were merciless but simple: courage against momentum. At 900 yards, Dealey ordered, "Fire 4!" The torpedoes left the tubes in quick succession, their wake slicing upward toward the enemy. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then came the explosion. Ikazuchi vanished in a single plume of smoke and water. In the control room, men cheered and wept at the same time. The impossible had happened. They had killed a destroyer head-on. The after-action report that reached Admiral Lockwood contained only one line of dry humour: expended 4 torpedoes and 1 destroyer. But within days, that phrase became legend across the Pacific. Dealey's down-the-throat shot rewrote the playbook. Submarines were no longer prey. They were predators capable of turning a destroyer's aggression against it. In the weeks that followed, Harder pushed her luck again and again. She torpedoed the 7,000-ton freighter Matsumaru, bombarded a Japanese garrison under cover of a tropical storm, and returned safely to port. Dealey's crew had started calling their boat by a new motto: "Hit 'em harder." The name stuck. Admiral Lockwood awarded the crew a Presidential Unit Citation, but he also had something bigger in mind. Intelligence from decrypted Japanese codes, codenamed Ultra, revealed that Japan's navy was running out of destroyers. Their losses in the Solomon Islands had crippled their escort fleet. Now, more than ever, every destroyer sunk mattered. Lockwood needed someone to hunt destroyers deliberately. He needed Dealey. The 5th patrol of the USS Harder began from Fremantle, Australia, in May 1944. The orders were blunt: sink destroyers. Dealey requested to patrol near Tawi Tawi, a major Japanese anchorage close to the oil fields of Borneo. It was a dangerous choice. The waters were shallow, the patrols heavy, but the rewards enormous. Tawi Tawi was where the Japanese mobile fleet, carriers, cruisers and their vital escorts, refueled and rearmed. If Harder could strike there, it would hurt the enemy at its core. On the night of June 6th, the submarine entered the Sibutu Passage, a narrow moonlit channel between Borneo and Tawi Tawi. The radar picked up 2 destroyers escorting tankers. One of them, Minatsuki, spotted Harder and charged. Again, Dealey refused to dive. He waited until the destroyer filled the periscope lens, then fired 3 torpedoes. 2 hit home. The explosion tore the Minatsuki apart. Less than 20 minutes later, another destroyer appeared, racing toward the battle site. Dealey fired 6 torpedoes, but this time the enemy dodged them all and dropped a curtain of depth charges. The Harder went deep, 400 feet down, hiding under a thermal layer until the sea grew quiet. When the noise faded, Dealey surfaced and continued the mission. That night, he scraped Harder's keel against the seabed to pick up Australian commandos, stranded on the Borneo coast. The operation succeeded, and by dawn the submarine was headed back through the same deadly passage. Waiting for him were 2 more destroyers. It was June 8th, and the sea was glassy calm. The destroyers patrolled side by side, sweeping the area with sonar. Dealey submerged, crept within 1,000 yards, and fired 4 torpedoes. 2 slammed into the destroyer Tanakase, blowing her apart. Another struck a second vessel, which erupted in a fireball. The shockwave rattled Harder's hull so violently that crewmen thought they'd been hit. For the 3rd time in as many days, Dealey had destroyed his hunters. In 72 hours, he had sunk at least 2 destroyers, possibly 3, and he wasn't done. On June 10th, Harder sighted a massive Japanese task force, battleships, cruisers and carriers preparing for a decisive confrontation with the US fleet. A destroyer peeled away to attack. Dealey aimed, fired 3 torpedoes, and dove as explosions echoed overhead. The destroyer disintegrated directly above him, fragments raining down on the submarine's hull. The crew listened as the enemy ship broke apart, metal screaming, compartments flooding, engines tearing free. The concussions rolled through the Harder like a drumbeat of victory. When Dealey finally surfaced that night, the men were exhausted, nearly delirious from the strain. Their patrol report later noted, fatigue of all hands approached a dangerous stage. But their sacrifice had meaning. Before submerging again, Dealey transmitted one last message to Admiral Lockwood, a detailed report of the Japanese fleet's position. That transmission reached the American Fifth Fleet under Admiral Raymond Spruance and changed the course of the war. The Japanese commander, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, reading reports of multiple destroyer losses and fearing submarine ambushes near Tawi Tawi, ordered his fleet to leave the anchorage one day early. That decision threw Japanese coordination into chaos and helped lead directly to the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where US forces annihilated Japan's carrier air power. Harder's attacks didn't just sink ships, they shaped strategy. For the first time, one submarine had influenced the movements of an entire enemy fleet. By the time Harder returned to Australia, she was a legend. Dealey was promoted, decorated, and told to rest, but he had no intention of slowing down. Less than 2 months later, he prepared for one final patrol. In early August 1944, the USS Harder sailed from Fremantle for her 6th patrol, leading a 3-submarine wolf pack alongside the USS Haddo and USS Hake. The men were worn but confident. Their boat had become legend, and their captain, Samuel Dealey, now carried the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the weight of expectation. His orders were simple on paper: hunt Japanese shipping off the Philippines. But every man aboard knew that the mission was more than another patrol. It was a test of how far courage could be pushed before the ocean pushed back. The sea around Luzon was treacherous. Shallow bays, enemy patrols, and shifting currents that betrayed periscopes like silver blades under sunlight. On August 21st, Harder and Hado struck first, ambushing a Japanese convoy emerging from Palawan Bay. In a furious night attack, torpedoes found their marks, sinking 4 transports and scattering the rest. The following day, they went after the escorts themselves. 2 Japanese Kaiboken-class defense ships went down under Harder's spread, their survivors watching the sea swallow them whole. That night, the Wolfpack regrouped, engines humming low in the darkness. Dealey's voice over the intercom was calm, almost tender. "Good hunting, boys." Those words would be the last many of them ever heard from him. By dawn on August 24th, Harder and Hack were prowling near Dassel Bay on the western coast of Luzon. Radar screens flickered with new contacts. 2 enemy vessels emerging from the harbour, an elderly destroyer and a smaller escort ship, CD-22. The destroyer turned back, but CD-22 kept coming, sweeping the water with sonar pulses. Inside Harder, the crew could hear the metallic pings through the hull like a clock counting down. Commander Frank Haler aboard the nearby Hake watched the scene through his periscope and realised with unease that the escort had detected something. Perhaps him, perhaps Dealey, but was turning toward the source fast. At 7:10 a.m, Haler believed the Japanese ship had locked onto 2 targets. At 7:28, 15 depth charges detonated in a rapid succession. The sea shuddered. When the echoes faded, Harder was gone. Whether Dealey had fired first will never be known. Some survivors later guessed he had executed another head-on attack, the very tactic that had made him famous, but this time the torpedoes missed, perhaps by yards, perhaps by fate. CD-22's depth charge pattern was precise and lethal. One explosion caved in the Harder's pressure hull, others followed, crushing compartments, extinguishing lights, and ending 79 lives in seconds. There were no distress calls, no oil slicks, only silence and bubbles rising through the morning light. Word of Harder's disappearance reached Fremantle weeks later. The news stunned the submarine service. Men who had studied Dealey's reports and admired his audacity refused to believe he was gone. In wardrooms across the Pacific, they debated what had happened. Some said exhaustion had finally caught up with him, that after months of non-stop combat, his timing had faltered by a fraction of a second. Others argued that CD-22's captain had been skillful, turning at the last instant and ruining Dealey's firing solution. No one could be sure. What they did know was that the tactic that had terrified Japanese destroyer crews had limits, and on that morning in August 1944, the odds had turned. Yet even in loss, the impact of Harder's 6 patrols was undeniable. When Dealey took command in 1942, submarines were still considered prey. By the time he vanished, they were apex hunters. His willingness to engage destroyers head-on had changed the psychology of naval warfare. Japanese captains who once attacked boldly now hesitated, aware that their target might strike first. That hesitation, that single heartbeat of doubt, saved countless American submariners in the final year of the war. Between 1944 and 1945, US submarines destroyed over 1,300 enemy ships, more than half of Japan's total wartime losses, choking the empire's economy and isolating its armies. Many of those kills followed tactics born from Harder's reports: short-range attacks, bold positioning, decisive aggression. Admiral William Halsey later ranked submarines as the single greatest instrument of victory in the Pacific, ahead of radar, planes, and even aircraft carriers. Dealey's example had helped make that true. His personal record stood unmatched. 16 ships sunk, including at least 4 fleet destroyers and 2 coastal escorts. More enemy warships than any other American submarine commander. For that record, Harder earned 6 battle stars, a Presidential Unit Citation, and a place in every submariner's legend. But statistics tell only half the story. What truly mattered was how. Dealey changed minds. Before him, caution ruled. After him, initiative did. His down-the-throat attack proved that a submarine could not only survive a destroyer's charge, but end it. The ripple effect spread through the fleet as younger commanders adopted the method, perfecting it with improved radar and sonar. Even when they didn't use it, the knowledge that they could changed everything. On the Japanese side, fear did the rest. Destroyer captains began launching premature depth charge barrages, wasting ammunition, or breaking off attacks entirely. Convoys moved more slowly, consuming fuel Japan could no longer spare. By the summer of 1945, the Imperial Navy was paralysed by the invisible menace below the waves. 8 decades later, in May 2024, the ocean gave back a piece of that story. An expedition by the Lost 52 project located the wreck of the USS Harder at a depth of over 3,000 feet near Luzon. Sonar scans revealed her silhouette still upright on the seabed, encrusted in coral but recognisable. The hull intact except for a gaping wound behind the conning tower, proof of the depth charge pattern that had destroyed her. The discovery closed a circle that had remained open since the war. Families finally had a resting place to honour, and historians finally had evidence of the last battle's violence. But for submariners, old and new, the image meant something more profound. It showed that Harder had gone down fighting, exactly as she had lived, head-on, unflinching, daring the enemy to come closer. Samuel Dealey was 37 years old when he died, younger than many of the officers who served under him. In 21 months of command, he had transformed not only tactics but mentality. His story became a parable told in submarine schools for generations, that aggression, guided by intelligence and discipline, could redefine an entire theatre of war. The sea, indifferent and eternal, had claimed him, but his doctrine endured in steel and memory. Today's submarine commanders, whether steering nuclear giants or silent diesel boats, still echo lessons born in those desperate years. Never surrender the initiative, trust your crew, and strike before fear has a chance to speak. The USS Harder's motto, carved into plaques and spoken in quiet toasts, remains simple. Hit 'em harder. It is both tribute and instruction, because in the calculus of undersea warfare, hesitation is death, but courage, cold, calculated, relentless, can bend history. Dealey proved that once, in a world consumed by fire, and the ripples of his defiance still move through the deep. When the periscope rises and the sonar pings begin again, every submariner who steadies his aim carries a fragment of that legacy. The knowledge that one man's decision to turn toward the enemy instead of away can change the outcome of a war. Beneath the calm surface of the Philippine Sea, 3,000 feet down lies the Harder and her crew, 79 souls sealed forever in silence. They rest where light cannot reach, but their story remains illuminated in every victory that followed. The destroyer killer is gone, but his lesson endures. Sometimes the only way to survive the hunt is to become the hunter.